Part 2 of our dialogue with Michael Beschloss.
With all due respect, Mr. President, the historical lens, I believe, is unlikely to support your assertions. It is not my place to make judgments, but we must look at the historical record.
Go on, Michael. Go on.
Let's take each question in turn, starting with what caused the Great Recession.
Isn't that an economic question?
Yes, but a consensus view is emerging as we look at the history of this period. The Great Recession was caused by Wall Street, in particular the reckless practices of the big banks or the so-called too-big-to-fail financial companies. The big banks are at the epicenter of the Great Recession and the primary cause of the entire fiasco. We know this now.
Yes. And it was Republican policies that led to it.
Mr. President, I am sorry to disagree, but it was not Republican policies alone. To be sure, President Reagan espoused the ideology of complete deregulation of the financial industry, but the dismantling of all checks and balances on the big banks was carried out legislatively under President Clinton. The architects were Robert Rubin, Larry Summers, and Alan Greenspan.
Robert Rubin was Secretary of Treasury under President Clinton, my husband. Larry Summers was Deputy Treasury Secretary. And Alan Greenspan was Chairman of the Federal Reserve under Presidents Reagan, both Bushes and Clinton.
Correct. Rubin, Summers, and Greenspan masterminded the dismantling of all constraints on the big banks. A landmark event of this period was the signing of the Commodities Future Modernization Act, which President Clinton signed into law on December 2000. The repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act was also signed into law by President Clinton. These two pieces of legislation removed all constraints on the big banks and helped to undermine the regime of financial stability that had lasted 50 years. In short, we now understand the fundamental cause of the Great Recession, and it is now indisputable. The big banks gambled with others' people's money. Heads they win, tails others lose. The big banks gambled away trillions of dollars and ultimately stuck the bill to the taxpayers. We are now paying the price for their epic mismanagement. If the Great Recession is a tidal wave that has swept away countless lives, the direct cause was the big banks. And the dikes, constructed over a period of 5 decades to protect us, was dismantled and torn down at the urging of Rubin, Summers, and Greenspan. To be sure, this was done in complicity and in glee by both parties, Republican and Democrat.
All right. Let's accept your account for the moment. I had nothing to do with the causes of the Great Recession. I got stuck with this. Let's get to the second question. My handling of the immediate crisis. I did a brilliant job, even if I say so myself.
Mr. President, I will have to disagree with you once again. I would cite 2 historical facts. First, your appointment of the economic crisis team. And second, your handling of TARP. History is likely to cast a dim view of your handling of both.
Go on. Go on.
You appointed as the leadership of your crisis team the very same individuals who let loose the big banks. You appointed Larry Summers as the director of the White House National Economic Council. And you also appointed Tim Geithner as Treasury Secretary. Geithner is a protege of Robert Rubin and Larry Summers. And then you reappointed Bernanke for another term to chair the Federal Reserve, even though his views seem to be no different in substance from Alan Greenspan. Historians will ask and need to ask why you, President Obama, appointed the very same individuals who created the mess in the first place to leadership positions to clean up the mess. It seems to have been a tragic mistake.
But they are the best and the brightest, and we did manage to head off the crisis. TARP was a success.
TARP was a success only in protecting the big banks. A significant part of the TARP legislation was to help Main Street, not just Wall Street. Those programs intended to help Main Street have all failed. That's not me, but the Special Inspector General for TARP saying it. The Special Inspector General's report card is as follows. TARP's objective to increase lending to small businesses. A big failure. The grade is fail. TARP's objective to preserve home ownership. Fail. TARP's objective to remove moral hazard. Fail. TARP's objective to reduce financial sector size. Fail.
TARP was designed to help both Wall Street and Main Street. But you are saying Wall Street was saved at the expense of Main Street?
That's correct.
What about the third and fourth questions? Did President Obama address the underlying causes of the Great Recession, and did he do so fairly and equitably? What does record show?
I am afraid the record is not good. The Special Inspector General's quarterly report to Congress, dated January the 26th, 2011 notes, and I quote, "In many ways, TARP has thus helped mix the same toxic cocktail of implicit guarantees and distort incentives that led to disastrous consequences."
Let me see if understand. We bailed out the big banks, but nothing has changed. The big banks, particularly the CEOs, profited before the recession, during the recession, and are now once again making record profits. In the meantime, we face trillion-dollar deficits.
Yes, I am afraid that is the case. The big banks have become bigger, richer, and more powerful than ever before. One can argue whether that is a bad thing or a good thing. But it can't be argued that President Obama has fundamentally changed anything. That is the sad and awful truth.